Hello all, welcome to the Reconnaissance for Red Blue Teams course on Pentester Academy. Now in this video, we'll continue looking at Memcache servers and we will look at advanced enumeration with something called LRU Crawler. Now in a previous video, I actually mentioned that we could use stats cache dump followed by the class ID to go ahead and dump the different keys. And using this command, we can actually dump all the keys on the system by going through each of the class IDs, right? Now, the interesting thing is this is just half the story. Under certain circumstances, this command will not work. And we have to look at more advanced ways of going ahead and attacking it. So here is an example where if you notice a stats items actually shows that there are 11 items. But when you do a stats cache dump 10, even though there's really only a single class ID here 1, you'll actually find the number of items that we have found is only 10. So we have 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. So the question arises, where is the 11th item, right? Now, this is really where Memcache, of course, it's constantly evolving, uses what are called LRU algorithms to go ahead and make the cache more efficient and faster. Now, LRU really stands for least recently used. That's kind of like a big giveaway, which is based on how frequently items are accessed or how short their time to lives are, which is the expiry timer of the item. They are arranged in different segmented caches for faster access. So as an example, let's say there is a new item and which has a TTL or time to live in seconds, right? Then what Memcache ends up doing is it puts this into a temp LRU cache. So what this basically does is it makes sure that that item can be accessed very, very fast, and at the very same time, it knows that the item is also going to expire very soon. Now, in contrast, you also have hot, warm, and cold caches, or rather segmented caches. And the whole idea really is, depending on a new item, its TTL and how frequently it gets accessed during its lifetime, you go ahead and put it in the specific segmented cache. So we can see in the state transition diagram, a new item can go into temp or the hot segment. And from the hot, it can, transition to warm or cold, and remain in warm, transition over to cold if it's not used for some time. And if it again gets used, very often, which is, you're getting it or setting it, then it can go back into the warm segment cache, right? Until, of course, finally, till it gets evicted or removed from the memory cache itself. Now, all of this looks a little bit complicated, so let's simplify this by looking at an actual example. So let's jump into our lab. Once again, this is the Memcache Recon Basics lab on attack defense. And if you do not know how to start this, look at the first video where I explain how to begin with this lab. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the lab link. Let's increase the font size a bit. And then I'm going to do if config so that we find the IP address of our Memcache, which is the next IP, which is .3. And I'm going to telnet into this Memcache server, so 112.1.1. So I'm connected. I'm going to do a quick version check. It's 1.5.12. And now let's actually look at the items in the cache. So I'm going to do a stats items like we've done in previous videos. And we can clearly see that the number of items in the cache is 10. Now, after this, what I want you to notice is the next 3 entries. If you notice, it says the number in hot is 0, when warm is 0, and in cold is 10. So this hot, warm, and cold really is corresponding to the hot, warm, and cold segment caches, right? Now, of course, temp, as I mentioned, these are items which have a very, very short TTL, pretty much in, seconds, and hence they're going to get evicted automatically very fast. So basically, this is what we are beginning with. Now, as I mentioned, there are two cases where there are transition between these. One is, of course, when we have put in a new item, and that goes between these different segment caches. So as an example, let's just say we set a new value, or rather, let's do the following. Let's actually do a transition from the cold cache into the warm cache. Now, this can be done by frequently accessing an item, and that way Memcache feels that you probably want to transition it over to the warm cache. So let's actually look at the list of keys. And for this, let's use the same command we used previously. So I'm going to go ahead and say stats cache dump 1 0. So this shows us all the keys in the class ID 1, slab ID 1. And we can see we have flag, we have password, etc. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to access password a bunch of times, and let's see what happens. So I'm going to do a get password. I'm going to copy this command out. Let's actually run this a bunch of times, right? I'm going to run this like 5 times, maybe 6 times. Now, if I do basically stats items, what you'd actually find is the total items, of course, remains 10. But now we have in the cold cache only 9, but in the warm cache we have 1. So what has happened is password has now transitioned from cold to warm. Now let's actually try running the same command which we did in a previous video, which is again stats cache dump. And what you would now find is we only see 9 items in here, right? Stats cache dump are a great command. And again, as of this writing, as of this making of this video, this is really what all blogs and places, Stack Overflow and all of those places talk about. That use this and you can dump all keys in the slab. So if you look at it now, amazingly, password has actually disappeared. It isn't there anymore, right? Now, why is this case? Well, if you actually look into the code closely, what you'd find is stats cache dump, the actual implementation, specifies that you're only going to look at the cold LRU, right? So it is not looking at the warm or the hot LRUs. And that's the reason why this command, even though everybody says use this, fails, right? Now, this is really where if you go through the documentation, and unfortunately, this pretty much seems to be just in GitHub, right? So this isn't documented anywhere else apart from in their GitHub repo. What you'd find is that to go ahead and navigate this LRU cache structure, we can actually use a command called LRU Crawler. And with that, if we use basically the option meta dump followed by the list of class IDs or all, then that ends up dumping all the details. So if we actually go back in here now, if we were to run stats cache dump 1 0 again, you'd notice password is still not there. And truth be told, if we wait long enough, password will once again transition from warm back to cold. So keep that in mind. But now in order to look at this, we can use the command LRU Crawler followed by meta dump. As I said, that's the keyword. Now if we say all, then it's going to look at all the class IDs. And now you would find that we see the key password here once again. And if you count this, this is going to be the total count of 10, right? So we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, right? There you go, right? Fantastic. So this is how we use the LRU Crawler meta dump all command. And this is the more definitive command as of this writing or making of this video. Now, one of the other things I wanted to show you was there is another way. I wouldn't prefer to use it, but let's look at it anyway. So let's actually do a stats, and then this time around, let's say stat settings. So now if we scroll up, so these are all the settings as we discussed in a previous video. And if you scroll all the way down, you would actually find that it basically tells you that LRU segmented is set to yes. So what this means is that currently we are using this segmented LRU model. Now here is a little hack which one can do, is you could actually change the model to flat, in which case basically there is only one LRU and that's actually cold, right? Now if we actually go here to LRU and there is a section called tuning, what you'd find is you can specify LRU mode, and after that if you say flat, that is actually the traditional mode or the older mode where there is basically only one. So if you notice, if switching from segmented to flat model, the background thread will pull items from hot warm into the cold queue, right? So what is going to happen is if at runtime I'm going to mention this as the model by putting in, LRU mode flat, then the LRU maintainer thread, that's actually one single thread which is kind of running in the background and maintaining all these segments, is going to pick up everything from hot and warm and transition them into cold. So let's actually go in here and let's do a stats items once again, just to make sure that we have at least one of these in warm. What we can do is let's put some more items into the warm queue, maybe one more, by doing a get on, let's say, zip. I'm going to copy this out. Just going to run it a couple of times. And now if I do stats items, what you'd find is we actually have two of these items in the warm cache, right? Which is password and zip both. And if we were to do stats cache dump 10, you'd actually find that now both password and zip are no longer in here, right? However, if we did LRU crawler meta dump all, you'd actually find that we still end up seeing all our 10 keys. Now, as I said, currently LRU segmented is set to yes, or else we are using the basically, which means we are using the segmented model. Now what we can do is we can change the mode to flat or the older traditional one. So LRU mode flat. So LRU mode flat. The moment we do this, everything from hot and warm transitions to cold. So it says okay, and if I now do a stats items, you'll actually find that we basically have everything in cold. And by doing that, of course, you have disabled the segmented model, right? So if I were to do stats settings, you can scroll down back, and if you notice now LRU segmented is actually set to no. And at this point, if you were to do a stats cache dump, you would end up finding our good old friend zip and password back in the output, right? Fantastic. So this is really what I wanted to talk about in this video. Why is this very important? Because you might not always have a situation where everything is in cold. It'll probably never happen, especially in a cache which is used quite often. But pretty much most of the documentation or people talking about in blogs, Stack Overflow, etc., only talks about cache dump. Literally nothing talks about LRU crawler, apart from probably an official blog post and the documentation on GitHub, right? Fantastic. Now, of course, the next question arises, we also saw basically that there was a temp cache, and there are items in Memcache which may get, added and removed very, very fast. So the question arises, how do you go ahead and monitor the Memcache at all times? And that's something we are going to look at in the advanced enumeration exercise, which we are going to take up next. Thank you.